San Francisco, California. This is What's Left, weekly political I cannot talk.
A weekly political discussion
challenging the mainstream left. Hold on. I'm still recuperating.
Challenging the mainstream left, even
Yes.
if you're sick. Oh my gosh, we're gonna have to edit all that.
I'm Eduardo Abarca, and this is Andy Lubson.
Hi there.
All right, so state our our topic for the day.
Well, I think you should.
For the week. All right. We have been brainstorming some of the topics we can be discussing. Excuse me for the horrible audio and for the horrible coughing. I am still here, alive. On the anniversary of the Charlottesville protests and counter-protests that was done last year, Andy and I decided to have a mixed match of conversations related to fascism, nationalism, and thrown in there some racism and the rise of just patriotism around, in the wake of the Trump era that started last year. And most of what we will be discussing isn't just going to be related to Trump, because we're not Trump here. We are talking broad topics that are about past administrations and regimes around the world, and even after this administration, which is normally what we try to do, because normally the left right now, especially liberals, are pounding on the Trump thing constantly, and we're not constantly interested in discussing Trump because it is beyond Trump. So let us get to it. Do you want to start us off? Well, I can start something off.
Yeah.
Whew. Last year, I think I'll start off with some emotional part of like my experience last year. Last year, in August, I was visiting a close friend in Florida, and I had traveled with him up north of Florida, a southern state, but south of Florida, mostly multicultural, multilingual area, right? But I had traveled north, to the northern part and more conservative part of Florida. Well, I had gone to go, and this is related, believe me. I had gone to go to. We went to a river and to do some river rafting and other outdoor activities and camp out. The point I'm trying to get at is my experience there, because when we were swimming and we got out onto the bank, and I was hearing some Cubans and some Venezuelans talk in Spanish. I had engaged in talking with them, and as I was talking with them, I saw a group, and they were white. I saw a group come over, and we were on the bank where there is this rope that people can swing from and to jump into the river. There was this group that was waiting, and as they were waiting for their turn, they were saying really racist things. They said, I'm not going to use the curse words because I want this video to be used, or to be heard, but I don't want it to be censored because of curse words, so I'm not going. But they said, effing spics not speaking English in our country. And they said, brown mother effers. And they said, this is America. And at that point when they said that stuff, I moved away from the group looking for my friend. who is white, and looking for him so that we can move away. And before I did that, though, I went over to the group of Cubans and Venezuelans, and I said to them that they were saying things and that they should watch out. And they couldn't. This group of white people kept going and kept saying things to me, to them, and they called us a bunch of names. And what stuck out is that because we were all speaking Spanish, they said all these things about how we could not speak Spanish, how we shouldn't even be in this country, how we were probably illegals. I am not undocumented in this country, I should say to everyone. And they said I am an illegal. And they said that one of the guys was wearing some shorts with a U.S. American flag, and he said he shouldn't even wear those shorts because he is not a U.S. American or white. So I found my friend, and after warning the group of other Spanish speakers, I told them what was going on. They then got their children and got onto their raft, and I had gone, and I left with my friend. And I really felt a little bit. I felt scared and endangered. I felt people had, especially after Trump had been elected, and the bigotry that he had said in public, it gave more power to people to be able to speak openly. And not to say that racism has only existed after Trump. I'm not one of those people that are saying, like, my God, I couldn't believe how much racism has existed. I've always known that racism has existed. But for me, it was just feeling like at the institutional level, people like in this country, for the president to outrightly say things like that gives rise in power to other people to say the same thing. And I can point out psychological studies about how, those inflatable things that you punch. Well, if you have a group of children and you have one of those inflatable things, most children have self-control, but once you see one child starting to do it and other children starting to do it, it's a group mass thing where you start doing it. It's been well documented that once someone does it, especially someone prominent or a leadership role within a group does it, most people follow suit. And I think everyone, there's lots of prejudice and racism, but when you hear it outrightly so, without being so benevolent about it, it does give people incentive to be that way, to act on their prejudices. And I felt really scared, and I just wanted to leave. Now, I say that because after that we returned back to southern Florida, and there were the Charlottesville protests that I remember tuning into the news, and all of a sudden I don't know when or where, like what time, I just remember hearing about Heather Heyer being
Run over.
Yes, run over. And that was the biggest, I think, I felt for me, given maybe my emotional state as well. And then hearing that gave me made me feel very unsafe, and I felt very emotional during this time because as a person of color, if that could be done to a white person, and as a person of color, what else could also come to us? And I fall into many stigmatized labels and stereotypes that people place on me. So I thought we could talk about several things in this conversation. I don't want it just to stick about Charlottesville, but I think because of the anniversary, we can from there speak about other things that are relatable. And like I said, I think that this conversation and this topic is going to be beyond Trump. It is one that we have to talk about constantly because we live in a society where these things are constantly being fomented as a society. And and that's all I will say about that for now. I think that is what I really would like to have a conversation about. And I think maybe we can also talk about the Antifa. There was some conversation that you and I had about like maybe pointing them out as well. I admire, I'm not fully aligned in every position, but I admire Dr. Cornel West. And he has a great interview, and he did a great interview because he was there, and he was surrounded by people shouting and yelling, we shall not be, what was it? We shall not be, it was,
I don't know.
I just blanked out right now.
Okay.
I had it earlier, but we shall not be, when they were yelling with the tiki fire and everything, we shall not be.
White people were saying it? I don't know what they were saying. Yeah.
I'll find out. I'm sorry that I'm blanking out just now. I think I'm thinking of lots of things.
Yeah.
But I think I'll just start off with that, and we can then discuss from there.
Right. Well, I actually hadn't heard that story. What happened with you and your friend, and were the other people friends as well? Like the people from
I just
Cuba
had one friend.
Okay, and
the other people I had met on the bank.
And that's
it's
horrible.
It's not my first encounter, by the way.
Yeah, but it happening just before Charlottesville. I think it drew a highlight to it. I think there's no question that things have become more polarized in this country. Like the divide between rich and poor, the divide between native and immigrant, and that polarization has been played upon in the election to get Trump elected, in the context of people's growing anger in their sense of desperation. So I do agree that racism's on the rise, desperation's on the rise, anger's on the rise, and I think the question that sometimes comes up for people is, with the election of Trump, is fascism on the rise in the United States, right? Because racism and fascism are not the same. Racism comes with fascism, but racism really comes with capitalism. So, and nationalism, not all nationalism means fascism. Just to give you an example, in this country, we interned Japanese during World War II. Immense racism against Japanese, and this country was an extremely nationalistic, and many people don't refer to that period in U.S. history as a fascistic period. So I do think we have to talk about what is fascism, because there's been a long, the last time I voted for a Democratic candidate was like 1992 or something like that, Bill Clinton. And pretty much every time there's been a Democratic candidate and a Republican candidate, most of the time one of the ways that I'm encouraged to vote for a Democratic candidate is Bob Dole or Romney or George Bush is a fascist, is bringing fascism, and therefore you have to vote for the person who's not the fascist or who's not bringing fascism. There is something different going on in the world right now that I think is worrisome, but I predominantly believe, and I think it's interesting because that demonstration in Charlottesville there was a Unite the Right demonstration, and they had a recent Unite the Right demonstration, and it was small.
Commemorate,
yeah. It was like 20 people.
And we're outnumbered by
the counter demonstration. So
in Washington D.C. no.
Yeah. So I do not believe we're seeing, I do not believe the United States or whatever's coming with Trump represents fascism coming here. I can talk about why I don't believe that, and I believe predominantly he's racist, or his election is racist, but then again, the Democratic Party policies are also racist. So it's like, so I think predominantly the accusations of fascism to me align more with like the common label upon the Republican wing of the two capitalist parties to push me and to push other people into lesser evilism and to electing Democrats as a way of fighting against fascism in some way. And I don't think that's the way you do it. I think the way you do, if fascism is on the rise, or when fascism rears its head, the way you do it is the way Antifa is doing it. You don't rely on the police. You can't trust the police because I believe fascism is an aspect of capitalism. You actually have to take it into your own hands. And I think it's either organized workers, organized students, but ultimately it's organized workers. And what Antifa is doing in terms of self-organization and taking the fight to the fascists themselves, I completely agree with that. So in that regard, I think that strategy, that tactic of challenging them directly, particularly when they come to intimidate and they come threaten violence, I do agree with that. That you have to be willing to fight fire with fire and organize yourself so you can fight them. And when fascism is on the rise, then workers, that's one of the reasons workers will need to be armed and organized so that I believe the only force that actually benefits from fighting fascism is the working class. The primary beneficiary of fascism, when it's required, will be capitalism. But I'll say more about that. Maybe I should. Well.
Do you want me to?
Yeah, go ahead, and I'll have more to say. Yeah.
In the liberal media, you hear a lot of people saying that Trump is fascist. Here's what I will say. I do not think that. I'm very reluctant to use fascism. Is very extreme to me. It's very. I mean, I think of Mussolini. I think of Hitler.
Right? Yeah.
I say yes and no. Mostly no. Why? Because Trump. I think of maybe it has to do with having known for languages. Language is very important to me, and even Noam Chomsky and even George Orwell's book talks about language. Language is very important, and I think people like to throw around socialism. They like to throw around words, and people lose the meaning and significance of words. Fascism, in the early part of the 20th century, it's a big deal to be called a fascist. It's something I don't normally just throw that word, just like I don't say everyone's just a racist either, just because they don't agree with me. I'm very reluctant to use it. Why? You have to think of the context, and you have to think about the difference. And first off, Trump is a Republican. Most Republicans believe in individualism. And individualism is no big government, no big brother, to be completely outside of regulated by the government. So the way that I have understood fascism is that it's a totalitarian I'm not good at pronouncing, as you can see. Authoritarian regime where it's led by one party and one leader, a dictator, and the military. And you're to completely trust this leader. And all parts of society are regulated by the government, which is why I brought up Republicans being on individualism, because they are constantly trying to put regulations or take off regulations off businesses. And so it is quite the opposite of what fascism advocate for, where they control all and they are for benefit of the state, of the government, and specifically for war, and do not do trade, whereas Republicans want to trade. And fascists will not do trade because they are solely trying to be independent, so that they're not tied to outside of other countries in case should they get into war or something, they might lose economically or be sanctioned off or something. So they are constantly trying to be self-sufficient themselves. And that is not what we're having here with Republicans. The other thing I will say is that, and here's where maybe we can disagree on, but here's what I will say. If you look at Mussolini's rise and you look at Hitler's rise, during Italy and during Germany's times, they had been defeated after World War One, and they had this context, and the context were, one where Italy was about to enter into a civil war, and you had the Germans feeling completely going into what I would say even worse than what we had as a Great Depression after World War One. And if you look in history, and these are the contexts from which that sort of sentiment, that sort of way of defeat, and the state of mind of that country and the people, those economic and just those pressures that gave them what was able to, the breeding grounds for the rise of a leader, a nationalistic leader, which is what they needed. And I don't think we have that here, quite honestly. I don't think we have it. I think that this is and I'm not completely saying that this country is the best of all countries, but strong military and strong economy. And people don't have that sentiment yet. And that is a different context from which the peasants were just completely upset in Italy and the occupations of their lands. So if we're going to say that, I don't think that we have that yet in this country for that sort of rise. Now I don't know, you're nodding your head, so I'm thinking maybe we're not in disagreement.
Not much.
But,
go ahead.
Yeah, so just to conclude on some key points, those are, I think, the two stark differences that stand out for me. There are others that maybe you might want to supplement to, but for me, those are the two striking differences. Three, because I mentioned three: the economy, individualism, and the context of which fascism rose. So those are for me. That's why I think of fascism like a very charged word, and I think that people like to throw racism and fascism is it pejoratively? Or
like
very just
indiscriminately kind of thing.
Cavalierly.
Casually.
That eventually loses this word. And I think that Trump is just one of many administrations that he is just not filtered. So he is just saying what everyone else is doing. But I don't think he's a fascist. I think a lot of times that what he says, to tapping into the anger and sentiment and scapegoating immigrants and people of color, and saying things like African or Haitian or other shithole.
Yeah.
I don't want to, because then we're going to get
whatever.
censored.
Yeah.
But as whole countries. So I don't think that he taps into that, but it's too radical I'm reluctant to say that he is a fascist.
Well, I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I think there's a few things I might add. I mean, it's not just about whether Trump is a fascist. It's about whether the movement behind him, it represents the rise of fascism. And again, I think there's been a misidentification of why Trump got elected. Trump got elected because of people's anger with the establishment, with the government, and he was able to tap into elements of the racism and nationalism that exist throughout the country on both sides of the aisle, right? In terms of people who, the pro-war sentiment, the patriotic sentiment, the same sentiment of nationalism that drove Obama to say we've got to build an ICE apparatus in order to keep, in order to preserve jobs for Americans, in the context of Obama making huge concessions to the banks. So he needed to do that scapegoating as well. He couched it in different language, but his building of that ICE apparatus and the protection of Americans, with regards to, so that people who were here illegally would be sent back, so that people who could get work for people who were here. That's no different than the kind of language that Trump is using, but not filtered with the political correctness. And there's also an attempt to try to push back against political correctness, against affirmative action and things like that, which I'll get to later. But I there are specific things, like you mentioned Italy and Germany, that have to happen for a regime to be called fascist. It generally occurs in countries that are experiencing a deep economic crisis, like you mentioned. That was happening in Italy, that was happening in Germany in the context of losing World War I and trying to dig themselves out of a hole when they were being punished by the victors of World War I heavily. And so for the capitalists at that time, and so first of all, you have a deep economic crisis. But secondly, in the context of that deep economic crisis, you have to have a rising class struggle that's starting to occur that is worrying the capitalist class in those countries, so that they don't just use the standard democratic veneer that they keep for themselves. They actually have to use a more fascistic leadership, because actually what's starting to happen is the mainstream parties are no longer appealing. And it's the polarized parties that are starting to be communists on one side and fascists on the other. That happened in Italy, and that happened in Germany. And so the capitalists have to make a choice. Are we going to deal with the communists, or are we going to deal with the fascists? And the capitalists, when they feel threatened in the context of economic crisis for themselves in that country, and in the context of rising struggle, they align themselves with the forces of fascism, and something happens then. In doing so, the capitalists have to give up a little bit of power. They have to let some of their stuff get nationalized. The state and capitalism or the state and corporations start to merge together in something kind of like state capitalism, so that the state now runs these sections of capital that before were just doing free market capitalism. These are all aspects of almost all fascistic governments. That's not what's happening in this country. We are not experiencing an economic crisis. The U.S. has had a protracted economic boom since 2008. It's actually doing better than Europe, doing better than China in many ways. And we're certainly not seeing any move away from free market capitalism towards a more nationalized things. And lastly, unfortunately, we are not seeing a huge rising level of working class struggle that is putting fear into the capitalists and forcing them to go to this. That's why I would say that predominantly this label of fascism is being used to shepherd everyone into the Democratic Party to back the establishment. And that's one of the reasons why I think it's important to know what you're actually contending with. My biggest concern, so I agree that if fascism is on the rise, you can't use the forces of the state to fight it. You have to take it on yourself, and the working class is the only agent capable of doing that. Because capitalism, basically, I see fascism, like I remember how I said that the capitalism is the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. To me, it's like fascism is when capitalism takes its mask off under crisis and shows you, this is my real face. This is what I really am. Hugely racist, hugely nationalistic, hugely imperialistic in terms of trying to recover profits. That's one of the reasons why Germany had to go to war, was to try to recover profits for itself. And same with Italy. And it's like capitalism on steroids. And so this is the real aspect. This is really what capitalism is about, is fascism. And the only way you can fight it, or the only way you can ultimately stop it, is you have to end capitalism. Because I think we will see it again, because there is globally rising nationalism going on. There is globally, so that trend globally, I think, is on the rise. But here, right now, in the United States, that's not what we're contending with right now. So maybe I guess if you don't want to say anything from there, or I could continue, or...
I'm trying to think. I think you supplemented what I had said. We have different positions.
Yeah.
You have a socialist position, which fascism would obliterate socialism.
Right. Fascism,
it
rises in the context of communism on the other end, rising to contend for power. The first fascists were in Germany, when workers were taking power in their factories, and workers were taking, were actually building workers' councils. And the government, it was actually a socialist government at the time who organized the Freikorps, initial fascists, and these were a set of workers connected with the police and the military, kind of like paramilitary operations, to go in and smash these working class organizations. And workers had to arm themselves to defend these things. They ultimately were unsuccessful. It led to the death of major leaders like Rosa Luxemburg, Karl Liebknecht, which actually made it so that the revolution didn't go in. I think contributed to not having a socialist revolution or a communist revolution, socialist revolution in Germany, instead led to its defeat. Fascism is what is an aspect of capitalism that you see when it's in deep crisis, and when that state is in deep crisis, and when it feels like it needs to essentially bring the forces of the state and the corporations together to, one, smash internal opposition and project power abroad. Now, obviously, the U.S. ruling class is expert right now at projecting power abroad and smashing working class opposition. But they don't need fascism. What they've done is they've gotten two political parties to basically, they've taken both the far left and the far right, and they've got them both kind of captured underneath those parties. And I think that really is what's happening. Actually, I think the capitalists in this country are sitting very pretty with regards to the fact that they don't feel any real threat to their control internally. And I don't think at this point there's no requirement to move towards fascism to exercise control in this country. Ironically, if we see the kind of struggle that I want to see in this country, which is sort of like what happened with the red wave, but on steroids, like just going much, then it's that sort of struggle that's going to make the capitalists nervous, and it's at that point we're going to start to see the kinds of battles that would lead to the potential rise of fascism. And again, that question of organized working class having to contend with racism and the divisions within the class in order to fight fascism effectively, and also workers need to be armed to defend themselves. This is what Antifa gets right, which is we can't rely on the police for that, because the police, when they defeat the fascists, these little fascists over here, those same police organized will defeat us when we try to organize to fight the capitalist, and we can't empower them.
I want to comment on Antifa. Antifa is anti-fascism.
Yes.
Now, what happened in Charlottesville, when you had the Unite the Right rally, there were people who were counter-protesting peacefully, and if anyone can now look on videos, on YouTube videos, and find out what it looked like. I mean, people were recording this stuff, and the Unite the Right rally surrounded violently and threatening the peaceful protesters. Mm-hmm. That is when the Antifa, if it wasn't because of the Antifa, like I said, I admire one of my, Dr. Cornel West.
Yeah.
And
who spoke well of them at Charlottesville.
He did.
Yeah.
He did.
Mm-hmm.
And he is considered by most people, he doesn't say he's a liberal, but people would say he's a progressive liberal, on the mainstream.
Right.
And he said if it wasn't because of the Antifa that protected them, mm-hmm. they would have probably been hurt. Mm-hmm. And the Antifa moved in because the police weren't doing anything. Mm-hmm. It has been recorded and by many reporters that were there, journalists that were asking the police, aren't you going to do anything about this? Mm-hmm. And many police just were standoffish is the word. Mm-hmm. They did not do anything. Mm-hmm. And right in front of the police department as well, a black protester was beaten up by some of the white protesters. Mm-hmm. And this is in plain sight and was recorded. And many of that stuff that was happening just shows mistrust in the state force, mm-hmm. the enforcement.
Right.
And the Antifa were there, and they protected. And that is why, now we have different positions on like how to, I would not do something violent. Mm. I would not do. I don't think I can go into being the Antifa. I would mm-hmm. probably be one of those peaceful protesters mm-hmm. because of other ethical stands that I have. But the Antifa, just to end on that point, the Antifa were there to protect, and they did something that was illegal, mm-hmm. but to show their unity and to protect those that were weak, mm-hmm. and to protect other workers and other people like them. Mm-hmm. I think that they should be mentioned. So, do you want to comment on the Antifa?
Yeah,
I think you said a little bit, but
yeah, and this is I haven't thought this through as much because I actually believe that one of the most important elements of Antifa is the self-organization of people. I wouldn't call it a working class organization. It's not the working class on the march. It's largely students, and maybe some of those folks are workers. It's not as organized as specifically out of the class as, I mean, I might even call it more middle class than anything. But that's not the important part. I think the most important aspect of their organization is their self-organization and the fact they don't rely on the state, and they are suspicious of the state. In the last demonstration, when there was no fascists to fight, they went ahead and fought the cops. Tactically, I don't think that was the right thing to do in the context of where the movement's at, but I think that I understand where they're coming from, and I agree with the way they challenge the state, or they question, they won't use the forces of the state, in a sense. On the other, the criticism is twofold, I think, which is what Antifa states is that it says no platform for the Nazis, for the fascists, no platform. To face down fascism or fascists when they're on the march and trying to physically intimidate people is one thing, and you have to fight fire with fire. But to say we're going to crack your heads if you try to speak, you better know what you're doing. Because what actually has been, some of the stuff which has been saying no platform for the fascists has really been no platform for racists, people who have racist ideas. And frankly, look, that would mean Republicans, that would mean Democrats, and one of the reasons I question that part. I think they fall into a trap there where they are no longer, like, I believe that one of the reasons why there's another way we have to challenge racism, which is we have to actually say, no, we have a different way of organizing. The reason we aren't racist is because we're for the organized working class. And racism hurts our class, and we need to be united along that. That is not the politics, I believe, that are dominant on the left with regards to challenging the racists right now. The dominant politics to challenge the racists, which is also held by Antifa and held by most of the left, is identity politics, which is to say, each group in its own identity will fight oppression largely on its own, but maybe we'll be together, but it's up for immigrants to fight for immigrant rights. It's up for blacks to fight against racism, and we have common alliances because we're oppressed. But ultimately, it's the identity must fight for that. And frankly, that identity politics does two things. One, it basically says to white workers who are also oppressed, socialists, the socialist argument is, no, we are all oppressed, so we all have a stake in fighting against the capitalists who might be using fascism or not. We all have a benefit to being in a common fight. We don't see it as an identity fight. We see it as a common battle. If you're going to fight racism with identity politics, then you're basically telling white workers, well, you go form your own group. Form your own group and you fight for your cause. And that's kind of what they're doing. Like, the left hasn't given them a place. When the left uses identity politics to fight racism, it doesn't give the basis, doesn't have a political basis for uniting the working class. And it basically tells white workers, you have white privilege, so the fact that you're poor and angry, it's because you really suck, because you don't have a reason for being in that situation. And I think identity politics are not capable of actually uniting the class. And in that regard, I don't really think the left that has embraced identity politics and Antifa has an answer for the racist argument, because basically we fight their racism with another form of separation, which basically, so we don't have an ideological answer, which is why we try to say no platform for you. I personally believe that's one of the reasons why we don't give the platform for the racists, because we can't answer their charge. We can't answer how we would really oppose them. The answer is a socialist answer. It's not an identity politics answer. It's an answer of, no, I'm not going to let you divide the class. All of us have a common enemy. It's not the immigrant. It's not the Muslim. It's not the black person in our country. It's you. It's whoever. It's Barack Obama. It's Google. Okay, because ironically, another institution which is right now deplatforming or not giving a forum for the fascists is Google. So currently, Antifa and Google are both working hand in glove together to not give a platform for the fascists. So I don't buy it with Google, and therefore I kind of think Antifa politically, I agree with their tactics, but I think their politics, in terms of, I think they largely embrace identity politics, have no way of actually fighting racism in this country. In that regard, I think that's why I'm a socialist, and this is a large reason why I wanted to do this What's Left, because I think the left, in embracing identity politics, actually has embraced a belief system which is incapable of challenging racism in this country, and is incapable of uniting the working class to actually fight racism or to fight fascism.
Now, I'm going to say something that is somewhat related. Yeah.
Does that make sense? What I
Yeah.
said? Okay.
Yeah, and it sparked up something else
Yeah.
in me to add to, or to go on to another but related topic to it, and that is that there is a growing number of white males that are feeling ostracized.
Yeah.
How do you say it?
Ostracized or outcast.
Outcasted or stigmatized,
Yeah.
and during this time they're feeling
Yeah.
this way.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to get a lot of heat from other people of color, but I'm not trying to. What I'm saying, if people listen, is that there is it is causing another shift, and that is from the liberal left, where they're then feeling a pull to say something, because they're left with feeling that they are isolated and blamed for.
They being white workers.
White male
Okay. Yeah.
folks.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a lot of what is happening, I think, during this time, that, this identity politics issue is also giving rise to that. And the separation and grouping of people. And that is, I have one friend in particular that I'm thinking about, that I wouldn't necessarily label him a racist,
Mm-hmm.
but I know that if anyone on the liberal left heard him, would label him a racist
Mhm.
and not listen. And I think
Mhm.
that is what's happening during this time, that we are not listening and having a platform on the left to listen to other people and to share ideas. And which is the reason why,
Right.
one of the reasons why we
Yes.
had discussed that we want to be able to
Do this.
have this
Yeah.
discussion forum, this forum online, so that we're able to stray away from the mainstream left,
Mm-hmm.
and possibly even be controversial,
Mm-hmm.
but explaining ourselves, and to sort of also have an open forum for people to have a conversation that they would normally be shut down for, because you're not falling into what the left liberal agenda is.
Mm-hmm.
And where you had actually said this, on the right, you feel that there are more people having these conversations and not shut down as on the left we shut down other folks, right?
Yeah, I mean,
There seems
yes.
to be like a more of a conversation that is being taking place,
Right.
without isolating themselves,
Right.
on the right.
I think that people will often, there's discussions we need to have about how to fight racism, where it's coming from, how to fight sexism, and where it's coming from. In order to do that, we're going to have to debate some of these things about the origins of these things, what constitutes those things, debates around our attitudes towards affirmative action, political correctness, debates around those things on the left. And generally, and unfortunately, the part of this whole notion of Trump and fascism, it's if you say anything that is not like a certain brand of leftism, you get labeled a racist and then a fascist, and then you're with them.
Yeah.
And then the whole discussion gets shut down. And I think that's the part of deplatform. Like, this is where I think the left we actually have an argument we can make to white workers and workers of color on the basis of or at least I believe socialists do. But we can't make that argument, and we can't even have that debate, because basically we've given so much ground on the left to identity politics,
Yes.
of white privilege, and you have your privilege, you have to put your privilege in check, and all of that does. I understand, like, even for myself, at times in a meeting, I do need to step back, right, at times, but I don't need to adopt a set of politics, that say, well, I have white privilege, so I have nothing to offer here, and that is not what I believe. I believe I have something to offer, but I believe really it's about all of us together as a class have something to offer if we can get together, and we can do that because we are all oppressed. We aren't oppressed equally, but we are all oppressed, and we will all benefit from banding together and fighting that oppressor.
Yes.
Identity politics does not allow for that.
I completely agree. And that is why I've also decided to do this with you, because I want to have those conversations. I want people to say things that a person of color, I'm not afraid to hear. I'm open to listening and to having an open discussion and debate. I normally don't like to debate but I like to have a discussion where we can disagree on something and see what points we can agree on. And I think for this discussion, as it relates to, because we were talking about workers and how they're separated, right? Dialogue is what I want to point out is necessary. And part of, I will speak to other people of color, part of what people of color have to also come to terms with is that it takes a percentage of us to also come and meet, or anyone that is oppressed to also meet the oppressor, or people who are being influenced by the oppressed. Now, I know that that's going to come off a whole different way for a lot of people and what that means, but we have to create some dialogue and be open to hearing what might be misguided, misconstrued, or misplaced anger, and to sort out things with people, to see why are you stating this, or where are you getting this from, or how are we coming to this, or let's figure this out. And that is what I have been doing to try to have conversations with people as I go about in the world, and with family, with my male cousins who say things that are completely sexist, or with other, not normally with you, but with other white friends. I have close friends that are white, and I have these conversations. And I think that is part of what we have to have. So I wanted to point out dialogue is a very crucial part, which I think the liberal left shuts down.
Yeah. And if I could speak to my fellow white worker, I would say that if you really want change in this country, then you want open borders. Not just like immigrant rights, you want open borders. If you really want change in this country, you want open prisons. Our prisons have to be emptied out, right? The wrong people are in jail. The people who are the biggest criminals, the biggest murderers are up there in Washington, D.C. Clear that whole place out. They're in boardrooms. The police should be in boardrooms, pulling every one of those people out of there, stuffing them in a prison, and taking out all the drug offenders. Open prisons. That's what it means to fight for a different world. Your enemy is not ISIS. It's not radical Islam. Your enemy is your own government, and you do not want your military over there fighting in a war in the Middle East, in China, in Russia. You want that military coming home, turning its guns on its own government, and saying, "How dare you mess my life up, sending me over there? I'm taking you down." That's what you want. So those are the sorts of things I would say to my fellow white workers. And lastly, the idea that somehow you're going to benefit from a segregated city, from a segregated workplace. No, all that segregation only hurts us. So that when it comes for teachers, when teachers think of their paraprofessionals as less than them, then we're just cutting our own throats.
Some people don't know
Paraprofessionals are teachers' assistants, and often, predominantly teachers are often teachers are often white. Paraprofessionals are often they get paid less, and often women, often of color. There's almost a feeling of a class divide, of a racial divide. When we are not able to bridge that divide, and I say this to my fellow teachers, and many of them are white, then we actually find our entire cause falling. And so that's something we have to understand. Is like this is what these are some of the slogans that I think we have to be fighting for, and say that no. Eugene Debs said something as long as there's somebody in prison, then so am I. Eugene Debs was a famous socialist, and I think that is the conception of solidarity that we actually have to rebuild in this country. And identity politics is not capable of doing that. The kind of politics that is capable of doing that, I think, are socialist politics of the uniting the working class internationally.
Yeah. I want to add as well that I do not think that it is right for Democrats, or even Republicans, both Democrats and Republicans, to be using this time for their political agenda. But they are definitely banking on more of this separation.
Yes, both of them.
That is happening.
Yeah.
For all these unite the right and separation and these protests, they are using it, and they will be using it for their campaign slogans.
Right. And the primary beneficiary of this fight between, say, the left and the fascists, the primary beneficiary has been the state and the cops and the strengthening of the two capitalist parties as institutions, as legitimate institutions where people can figure out to get their grievances dealt with.
Yes.
And it's a small battle down here that is actually distracting us from the things that are being taken from us in huge, on big steps, and ways in which our own political framework is getting narrowed by the two capitalist parties in this country. So I think challenging fascism is important, but in this context where I do not believe that fascism is on the rise, it's actually serving as a way of distracting and dividing us, and keeping us from identifying the powers that are actually moving in this country and making things more difficult on us. And those two powers are the Republicans and Democrats.
Do we have any more to say?
I think I'm good.
I'm as well. I do want to say something about the next video that we are going to be doing.
Yeah.
So let's just conclude then. There is going to be potentially next week. I think we should do it next week.
I believe that Gabby and Hema are going to be able to figure out the stuff around Nicaragua. So we're going to do an interview next week.
All right.
It's either going to be with Nicaraguan activists or... so one of the things we hope to do is actually invite listeners of What's Left to actually speak about their beliefs. All right. And so Eduardo has a few friends. I know people who have been listening to this. Actually, in the future, if there are people who themselves, if they like these interviews and they themselves would want to be interviewed, you could reach out to us. Maybe we don't know you, but maybe we'd be interested in doing that. Again, the ideas of regular people out there. We're not necessarily saying that the ideas that they say are ones we agree with.
Yes.
I don't know if.
To be clear with that.
Well, but I don't know if we're going to. Like, I don't feel like it's our place to, say put them on the spot. I think it's a place. But
let me explain what timing when I say that is that we're open to having dialogue with people who may have different points of view.
Yeah.
And what I want to say is that normally people in the conventional world will associate, oh, you brought someone onto this platform, so you must be in agreement, or you must somehow people collapse that you automatically will be like with demonized. This platform is demonized for bringing these people on, and
this is the whole problem with the left. It doesn't allow for this for the different ideas people have. Like we've got a lot of crap in our heads, all of us. And we have to have a chance to share those sorts of things. I don't know if we'll do a little challenge. We challenge each other, I think, more so. Yeah. But it's more really about giving people, our audience, to the extent that we have an audience, which we kind of have an audience, to hear other people's ideas and start to think, well, what do I think?
Yes.
It's really not important whether you agree or disagree. It's what do you think?
Yeah.
And so...
we welcome differences.
Yeah, and we're going to see how it works. And I think your friend is going to be the first one we try.
Yeah. Yeah. So if this Nicaragua interview plays out, great. And if it doesn't, well, we have another.
And my partner, I'm trying to convince her to do this as well.
Right,
So
yeah. So.
And my nephew.
And your nephew.
Yes.
All right. So.
And a fellow socialist who has a different idea about socialism than I want him to do this as well.
I think it would be great to have him or her.
Him, Bruce.
Or in between.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Right. Okay, so your friend, all right. So, so we welcome anyone. And how you can contact is, I think there is messaging on YouTube.
Yes, or WebNode. Or WebNode gives you a contact. If you go to the WebNode website for this, you can do that. You can do it through YouTube. I think iTunes, you can get to a web page and find out. There are several ways, but one way somebody contacted me was through Webnode. Go to that and like write us a letter and say, hey, I'd be interested in this, but wait, we've got a few interviews to do. Wait till you see an interview and see if you would want to do such a thing.
Yeah.
And we're going to see if it works.
Right.
You know.
So that concludes this topic, and I will just say, please share with all. That is the most important thing, because it isn't really about likes and bells.
And my partner said, if you're an iTunes listener and you like what you're listening to, write a review. She said that helps us get more people out.
Or at least press the star for ratings.
Oh yeah, ratings. Rate it, and then
do that for other podcasts.
But also write a review. Tell us,
Yes.
Eduardo talks too much.
Do I?
I know, it's me. I talk too much.
You will find us on Google Play, and you will find us on Google Play, Stitcher, iTunes,
YouTube, and BitChute, which is like the YouTube that's not being censored as much.
All right. So please let us know.
All right.
And share with all. That's most important.
So we'll see you next week.